everyone, this is Rachel Alsan, and I will be doing the Learn and Style sections of the Japanese Americans in the United States, both pre- and post-World War II. I'm going to do a brief overview of their arrival and go more in depth with it later on. So the Japanese started immigrating mid-19th century and were primarily immigrated to Hawaii when it was still an independent country rather than a part of the United States. In the late 19th century, Japanese began immigrating to the mainland, primarily in California. And upon arriving in California, they sought out work in the agricultural field, which is one of the fields that they specialized in. So to understand the why of the Japanese immigration, we need to look at the Chinese. The Chinese were the leading agricultural workers in Hawaii, but began leaving for better job opportunities and for a better life, leaving the plantation owners in Hawaii in desperate need of workers. So the foreign minister of Hawaii reached out to the Japanese government and signed a labor convention that hired Japanese agricultural workers as contract workers. Life on the plantation and the conditions were harsh. The wages were roughly $4 a month, with planters withholding at least 50%. The workers faced 10-hour workdays and were committed to 3-year contracts. And because the working conditions were so harsh, most workers left before their contract was up. Now, some did not come as contract workers, but they came on their own in search of a better life. And these immigrants came in hoping to establish themselves to make a better life for them and their families. And they specialized in agriculture as industrial fishermen, miners, loggers, and service workers. And most of the farmers owned their own land. Now again, they wanted to come to the United States and establish themselves and settle and create roots. So the men would come first and do that with well-paying jobs, possibly land of their own, and a stable place to live before they sent for their wives and their children. They wanted to make sure that they could provide for their families before moving them to a whole other country. Now, once the women were there, they did join the workforce. They believed that having 2 incomes could help with rent and purchase in land. So they would either come on as wage workers, so they'd get their own paying position, or they helped on the family-owned farms so that they didn't have to hire additional workers. Now, those who did not own their own land but worked for others were the Japanese were valued by the white farmers because of their expertise in agriculture and because of their low labor cost. Now, the Gentleman's Agreement of 1907, we're going to go more in depth in the education profile and learning style video, but it did impact their experience in the United States by limiting their immigration into the United States, although there were loopholes that allowed them to still come to America. Just a few were, if you were an American citizen, you were still able to bring your wife and children if they still lived in Japan, or they had this thing called picture brides, where the Japanese women would send their pictures to men in the United States and they would get married prior to meeting, and upon the woman's arrival in the United States they would be legally married, which would make them legal to stay in America. Now, World War II and post-World War II. So in 1941, Japan's Navy attacked Pearl Harbor, and after attack, Japanese Americans were arrested. The country viewed them as a security risk and threats. They gathered up anyone with Japanese ancestry, whether they were American citizens or not. And the country's view of Japanese Americans changed drastically. Racism, discrimination, and fear all increased. And the Japanese Americans, once they were arrested, were ultimately sent to internment camps, where more than 70% of them were American citizens. And inside the camps, there was terror and punishment instilled but later communities were set up, and we will talk about that more in the education video. And prior to being sent to these camps, the Japanese Americans had to sell their land and businesses or close them altogether because they couldn't keep them because they were in the camps, and they couldn't very well keep them while being in there. There was no way to be able to keep them open. So this is just a brief history and economic profile of the Japanese Americans, and we'll discuss it more in depth as well in the education and learning profile or learning style video. For the two are actually tied together, so we'll discuss that in the next video. Thanks.